Hey viewers, this time we're uncovering the most ridiculous and questionable things therapists have said to their clients. Let's dive right in.
Compass dial A. What was the worst thing a therapist has said to you, leading you to think this may not be a good fit? When he introduced Jesus into the conversation.
So I'm not religious, but I am indigenous and spiritual. I knew I had to find someone who understood us as a people, because if I explained some of my thought process and beliefs, they would put me in the damn psych ward. Luckily, my therapist is Caucasian, but very immersed in our culture, so she may not believe what I do, but she respects it.
First time seeing one. I had never opened up before and decided to give her a fair chance. I answered all her questions and told her what had happened to me as a child. Her answer to my trauma. Why aren't you over that yet? Other people had it worse than you and they're over it. I never went back to see her. I got another one in the building and I told him how his coworker had treated me. He was not happy to hear that. He was luckily different and I kept going there and got my diagnosis that explained so much about the mess in my head. When I asked about the other one a few months later, she didn't work there anymore. My guess is more people complained about her and she was let go because of it, but I will never know for sure.
About a year before my father died, they convinced him to go to therapy. He was a retired trucker with a potty mouth. My brother went missing 10 years ago after the death of my mother. It was my father's greatest sorrow. The therapist said to him, "I think it's time to accept that your son is dead." It took me an hour to get it out of him. I fucking lost it. I worked in a funeral home that worked on contract with the coroner's office. I know damn well how it works, and I knew we would have been notified if he was indeed deceased. I called the health clinic and spoke with the executive director, and I said that the therapist told my father she has no children. Then she could not understand the love a father has for their child. I said she just killed any hope my father had that his son lives. She was gone a month later. I'm not a reactive person, but that royally pissed me off. My father died a year later. He was only 63 years old. I did receive confirmation that my brother is still quite alive, but remains very unwell.
During the first appointment, I told her I wanted to work on my anger because my boyfriend and I were fighting a lot. Then we talked about my family, and I told her I'm the youngest child. With no hesitation, she said, "Is that why you throw fits to get what you want?" She didn't know what my boyfriend and I were fighting about. She didn't know anything about my family situation. Just automatically, "You're the youngest, so you throw fits when you don't get your way." Dropped her, dropped the boyfriend. Life is much better.
This is just the beginning, and it is already infuriating. It's disheartening when those expected for professional guidance appear to lack the necessary expertise. Moving on.
The third time they suggested religion when I had explicitly told them no and not interested already. They might have well have said, "Your case is just too serious and only God can help you," and that they're incompetent. The thing is, it's also poor ethics of not outright breaking code of ethics and improper counseling practice to suggest religion again and again when it's been rejected already.
I have struggled with anxiety my whole life, so therapy has been nothing new. A few years ago, I tried a new therapist, and we were discussing my ruminating anxious thoughts, something I have always struggled with. And I kid you not, she looks at me and goes, "Have you just tried not thinking about it?" I went pretty silent, and all I could think was, well, if I could do that, you'd be out of a job. Not the best method, but I did ghost her after that one.
I was telling my therapist about how I struggle to get into relationships because I'm naturally introverted and I had an abusive boyfriend in the past. She rolled her eyes and told me to just go out and get on apps, do something about it. It made me feel like she was annoyed with me, and it killed any kind of comfort I felt with her.
A therapist starting almost any sentence with "just" is a red flag. It's like the "I'm not racist, but" of therapy, since anything that follows "just" is likely to be unhelpful, if not actively invalidating.
I was severely depressed to the point of wanting to die, in an extremely abusive relationship, living 2,000 miles away from anybody I knew, stuck at home with 2 small kids. And he asked had I ever thought about talking to my significant other about my feelings.
Well, she fell asleep when I was right about to get into some serious feelings and trauma, so that was my sign, LOL.
First time ever seeing a therapist at age 11. The very first meeting is just an intake meeting, which is normal. I'm explaining something and she laughs and said she didn't realize people actually did what I said occurred. Well, it did. I walked out of there and told my dad I wanted a new therapist.
When my therapist told me, "Someday you'll miss the attention," after I told him about a man that followed me around Walmart, blowing me kisses, waving, and asking for my number after telling him many times to leave me alone. This was shortly after being stalked by a different man.
Everyone has friends, why don't you? Then dropped me as a client minutes before the next session and tried to charge $200 for a barely 1-hour phone call.
I was in a dating relationship and having so much anxiety about it. So I sought counselling because he was a nice guy. I didn't want to break it off, but also I had so much anxiety. She said, "Oh, you should just marry him anyway." That wasn't helpful, and no, I didn't marry him, thankfully. Anxiety blinded me to some red flags. I'm happily married to someone else now and had no anxiety dating him.
Not a therapist, but a GP general practitioner. I went to see as part of the process to get on the wait list for NHS CBT cognitive behavioural therapy. I went through something quite rough for me that had me low for months. Isolating myself, loss of interest in anything, irregular sleep, more frequent suicide ideation. I still looked fine and like me, but I didn't feel like me. I just felt flat for months on end. Finally, went to the GP to hopefully get some help, explain my situation. And she told me that it couldn't be that bad because I was laughing while chatting with her. I was stunned and left the appointment feeling dismissed, embarrassed about my own feelings and stupid for having even booked it. Switched my GP soon after.
Oh, goodness. I specifically asked my insurance company to refer me to non-religious therapists, and they absolutely came through for me. My first session, I discovered that this therapist lied about not being religious because people wouldn't see her otherwise. And then she told me to accept God's will that my mom was dying. Honestly, it's a tie between that and the therapist who told me not to marry my husband because his car gave therapist bad vibes.
FYI, going to talk about SA in my submission to this thread. My therapist told me it's no surprise I've been SA'd before because of the way I'm built. She said men have a hard time controlling themselves around fertile-looking women. Blamed it on biology and instinct rather than individual choice. This was after she told me I only think I'm bisexual because I'm influenced by the media. Should have been more keen to that red flag, huh?
My therapist started venting to me about her anxiety and panic attacks, treating me like her therapist. And I am a therapist, but still. I left after that.
I totally understand your anorexia because I really enjoy fasting. I don't think you should worry too much. Fasting is good for well-being, and besides, you could probably live to 80 at that weight. I won't specify weight, but I was emaciated, also had a seizure as a result of my ED soon after.
Oh boy, there's so much to unpack here. From therapists giving unethical advice to dismissing their clients, it's been nothing but disappointment. Let's check the next comments.
I was seeking therapy because, among other reasons, I was having some difficult feelings around polyamory, despite wanting to pursue it. My therapist was not polyamorous and never had been, which isn't automatically a disqualifying factor in this situation. Sometimes people have studied certain sub-communities to serve them better, or have had friends or family members in those communities, or whatever. But it was clear he just didn't have any useful advice or reframes to offer me. At one point, when I described my latest poly woes, he said, "Well, what do other poly people do when they experience that problem?" And it was in that moment that I realized this man wasn't going to be able to help me. I had already read tons of books, articles, and blog posts on the issues I was dealing with, and talked to many poly friends and acquaintances about it. If knowing what other poly people did in my situation was helpful, I would have already been helped by then. I subsequently found a therapist with non-monogamy experience who was way more helpful to me.
I was headed for a divorce. I was also the main breadwinner, and we had just moved to a new country based on my then husband's ask. The therapist told me that he envisioned a therapy whereby they would completely break me down, and he'd delegate it to his colleague. The colleague sat next to me the whole time, and the only thing he said was hello and goodbye. No, I'm fairly certain I didn't need to be put through the ringer by a therapist whose voice I barely heard and pay $450 per session for it. ETA post-divorce, my son had a tough time coping, including the classical loyalty issue of feeling he needed to choose between mum and dad. The first therapist we saw said that, "Mom, you are your son's problem." It's what I heard for 2 years, repeated in front of my ex and my son. I had zero self-confidence and felt that it was unacceptable, but kept putting up with it. We changed therapists, got a proper diagnosis and treatment for the kid, and never looked back. We're doing great now.
Couples therapy with the Hubs. We had a newborn, less than 1 hour old, which we had no babysitter for, so guess who came with us? Hub said sex is how he felt loved. I had not been putting out and said very clearly why. Therapist told me to suck it up and have sex and go to therapy to address my feelings afterwards. There wasn't anything she could do to change the fact that his love language was sex. He needed that. But that I could get therapy to treat my mental disorders. You know, you're right. I just created life and shoved it out my hoo-ha, which caused a plethora of issues from hemorrhoids to tilted uterus to postpartum depression, to tits that were the size of watermelons that leaked, if I even heard someone else's baby. But yeah, you're right. Let me just bend over so he can shove his love language into my bruised and battered baby factory, regardless of whether it's painful or I'm not aroused at all, since I can always address how I feel about that in therapy. The next counselling we received was the court-ordered how to co-parent effectively during our divorce, which he fell asleep during and had to repeat thrice.
I was having a hard time dealing with my miscarriages, 5, and the therapist told me to keep trying and eventually one will stick.
90% of what came out of her mouth was the same question of, how does that make you feel? It's like she was a parrot and it's the only thing she knew how to say, and then was switched with, you have to have faith in God that things will work out. I am not religious at all. And I told her more than once that I wasn't comfortable with that expression, and she just didn't stop. She really annoyed me.
She made some racist comments, and I never made an appointment with her again.
The fact that she shared every detail with my church bishop because the church was sponsoring the therapy with a church-employed therapist, Mormon. Said bishop used the fact that I had a completely normal dream involving sex. I was 23 and single, to determine that Satan must be entering my dreams because I wasn't married and therefore could not otherwise have thought about sex unless Satan put that thought there. He then took over the therapy, determining it was a religious thing, and proceeded to do some horrible things. Fuck the LDS Church for not doing background checks on leaders universally.
It gives us a critical reminder that not just anyone can effectively provide therapy, highlighting the necessity for therapists to be deeply attuned to their clients' diverse experiences and needs. We'll move on for the remaining bit.
Going through the worst depression of my life, about to have a baby within the next 2 weeks, and during our session, I was talking and ranting and getting my emotions out. She interrupted me, told me my hour was up, and that she was going on vacation and couldn't see me for about a month. Never went back to her.
This was before I was diagnosed. I told him about my insane mood swings and how sometimes I would flatline and feel absolutely nothing after experiencing rapid mood swings. He literally laughed at me. I didn't know how to react, so I awkwardly laughed along with him. After the session, I said I won't be seeing him again. I can't believe I let him treat me that way.
Starting seeing a therapist 2 weeks after my mom passed away from aggressive cancer. I was spiraling into depression and barely coping, not eating, not sleeping, etc. During the first session, she just kept repeating that I was handling things really well despite what I had been through. She really didn't have much else to say. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt after the first session and figured maybe she just wanted to learn more about me before she could help. After having a second session with her where she asked me all the same questions and told me again that I was handling it well, I decided to not schedule with her anymore. It was unfortunate because I really needed help at that time and she just seemed so uninterested.
When she told me essentially that I wasn't making progress and suggested that I go see her friend who was a medium, I'm convinced it was a ploy to earn her friend some money and give her clients more trauma to come back to her with LOLE. 6 months in, and she said she didn't know anything about me. Like, where have you been, lady?
Well, that's quite a roller coaster of experiences. Trust and empathy are the cornerstones of effective therapy, so it's disappointing to hear how often some therapists were lacking in these encounters. Let's hope these amazing people have found the right therapist for them. Have you encountered an unprofessional therapist? Let us know in the comments.